So you have $1 million or $2 million, maybe 500K, or maybe even $5 million, and you're wondering, hey, Azul, do I have enough to retire? And if I do, how much can I afford to take out of my retirement account each year without risking running out of money during my lifetime? It's a super important question. I'm going to share a couple studies that'll give you some guidance on this. And most importantly, the last study I'm going to share with you is a technique that most of us can do that allows you to spend quite a bit more money out of your account and still not risk increasing your risk of running out of money. So let's jump right in. So basically the question most people ask me is, I've got this account, X dollars, and how much money can I spend a year, not only this year, but in the future. And, oh, by the way, of course, if I'm spending $100,000 this year, in 20 years, obviously I have to spend a lot more than that in order to buy the same amount of things. So I want that cash flow, but I want to index it for inflation every year. And that's called the sustainable withdrawal rates. And there's really 3 studies that guide us on this. The first was conducted in 1994 by a gentleman named Bill Benson. And what he did is he looked at returns from 1926 to 1993. He published his report in 1994. And came up with some guidance on this. Now, it might seem like, well, why do we need these studies, right? If the stock market returns 7% a year, 8% a year on average, why can't I just take 6.5% a year and be done with it and never have to worry about running out of money? The reason you can't do that, and it's super important, is unfortunately, you'll likely run out of money if you do that. It's a common mistake, and it's one that was famously done by an icon in the investing industry, published an article where he said, just keep it simple. Here's what the stock market does. Take out a little bit less than that. And he was quickly chastised and said, no, unfortunately, that's wrong. And he was rightfully chastised because it's dangerous. That's dangerous advice. So what should you do instead? So getting back to Bill Benson's 1994 study, he went back, he looked at stock market data from 1926 to 1993, and he found that using statistical modeling called Monte Carlo simulations, he found that most families could take out about 4% a year and have a high likelihood of never running out of money. And that was really a seminal study. That was one that was embraced by the industry. And then a gentleman by the name of Michael Kitces comes along. And Kitces is famous. He's kind of a trainer for financial advisors, an educator for financial advisors, a thought leader in the industry. And Kitces looked and said, yeah, I believe the 4% that passes the sniff test, but doesn't it matter whether the stock market is hugely overvalued like in 1999 if you happen to have been super unfortunate to retire in that year? Doesn't it matter if the stock market's super expensive versus if the stock market might be less expensive? So he looked at the data and broke it out by valuations and really came up with 5 quintiles. When the market's super cheap would be 1 quintile, and when the market's super expensive would be another quintile. And what he found is if you had the misfortune, like I said earlier, of investing when the market was super expensive, you could still take out that 4% a year, because that was kind of a worst case scenario that Benson did. So it's not surprising that those numbers overlap. But interestingly, if you started your retirement in a year and started taking withdrawals, that's what's important. Not when you retire, but when you start taking withdrawals. If you start taking withdrawals when the market was super inexpensive, you could actually take out about 10% a year. Now, don't you go doing this, because you're likely to run out of money in today's world, because the stock market is not super inexpensive. And when the stock market is super inexpensive, it's inexpensive for a reason. It's inexpensive because people are fearful. So it really takes a lot of courage to take advantage of that. That would be like, if you had retired in March of 2009. I think a lot of people probably postponed their retirement because the stock market was so scary then. Where in hindsight, that probably would have been a good time to retire. Okay, now on to the technique that I promised to share with you that can boost your cash flows by about 25%. And that's a study by a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Guyton. And what Guyton said, really a simplistic approach. He took both the work of relied mostly on Bill Benson's study, but said, most of us, if the stock market is doing poorly, we're probably going to not give ourselves that inflation adjustment the following year. So, just like I think it's natural when the stock market's doing poorly, when the economy's doing poorly, we all cut back a little bit. And Guyton recognized that and said, what is a sustainable withdrawal rate if instead of taking this inflation adjustment every year, I choose to forego that in years where the stock market has a negative return? So it's really brilliant in its simplicity, right? It's a nice twist on Benson's study. And what he found is instead of a 4% withdrawal rate, you could actually do a 5% withdrawal rate. And that's huge, right? That's a 25% increase in cash flows. That makes a difference. That's the difference between, that funds an extra adventure or an extra trip with the grandkids. So I think it's super important that we keep that in mind and we know about that. So before I close, I want to share with you, there's a couple considerations that you want to know about all of these studies. Super important you know this. First, it's based on incredibly small data sets. The data, if you look at 1926 to 1993, Benson actually used what's called a 30-year rolling return for the stock market. Well, there's fewer than 40 30-year rolling returns in that period of time. So super small data sets that he used. It's also, of course, almost by definition, looking at backward-looking data, right? In the SEC, you see these ads that say past returns are no guarantees of future returns. So that's true, and so you want to be careful. This is backward-looking data. And then the last, which is super important to mention, is all of this data is based on a fairly aggressive portfolio. These are not, all cash portfolios or primarily bond portfolios. These are stock portfolios that are anywhere from 70 to 50% to 70% in the stock market. And you're going to feel a fair amount of the stock market's volatility in a portfolio like that. So those are some things you should know. I hope you found this video super helpful. If you did, do me a favor, hit the like button. It really does help the YouTube algorithm find other people that these videos can help, and leave me a comment. I love reading the comments that you guys leave. We're building a really nice community here, so thank you for all of you that have taken the time to leave a comment. And if you haven't done so yet, please take a minute, say hello. I'd appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Azul, encouraging you to take full advantage of the youth of your senior years. Remember, you're only young once. Use this time wisely.